Hello, Briar. How's it going?
It's great. Nice
There
to
we
see you,
go.
Nick.
Nice to see you as well. We'll get into it. I'm super excited for today. Hello and welcome everybody to the Mom Project's mPower Hour. My name is Nick Cott. I'm a customer success manager over here at the Mom Project, and I am very happy and excited to moderate today's discussion with Briar Dougherty from Career Organic. So today we're going to go over a couple things. Number one, we're going to get insight into Career Organic's hiring strategy and a little sneak peek into their organization. We're going to get some answers to some of the biggest questions from job seekers in today's market, really concerning the job search strategy, best practices for re-entering the workforce, and how to navigate the application process. And as a little bonus that Briar added in, since Briar and her company, Career Organic, use the Mom Project platform exclusively for the company's talent acquisition, we're going to ask Briar to give us some insights into the platform from the employer, that hiring manager's perspective. So before we get into this fun stuff and we start chatting with Briar, a few housekeeping notes before we get started. So number one, this session will be recorded. It's going to be available here on LinkedIn to rewatch, as well as our YouTube channel. Now, as a note, since this is a LinkedIn Live, all the comments are public. So please put those comments in the chat. We're going to have some engagement. We're going to have some Q&A. And we are going to have time for those audience questions at the end of our session. So please add your questions into the comments throughout the session. We love to see it. I know it's going to fire Briar up as well. And we'll try and get through all these questions at the end. So as we begin, to save some time so we can get more Q&A in here, please check the comments below for a short bio about our speaker, Briar. Now, let's get started. So Briar, we'd love to hear, just kicking things off, some of your career transitions and pivots that really led you to where you are today as a CEO and founder of Career Organic.
Sure. I think that, first, when you think about your career transitions, and the most pivotal pieces for me have really been the biggest struggles I've had and the things that I've had to overcome. And early on in my career, I lived in New York City. I went to FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology, and I worked full time and went to college full time. And so by the age of 20, I was a general manager for a health and fitness club, Crunch Fitness, in Soho, Manhattan. I had a 55 staff. It was a 4-story location, and I wasn't even legal to drink yet. And so that was one of my big kind of fears and overcoming just how do I belong in an environment where everybody, would tell me I was a kid. Oh, you look like a baby. And I'm like, I'm not legal to drink, but I'm not going to tell you that. And so I did very, very well there. I made a career transition from health and fitness into the salon and spa company after I was attacked by a member. So I was actually taken down physically by a member in the fitness facility that I was managing. I came to the defense of one of my assistant managers, tore everything in my wrist. So ligaments, cartilage, everything, and was on disability for about 4.5 months. And after that, I had really lost my zest for the industry. So I was recruited to manage the salon and spa at Saks Fifth Avenue. And for anybody that knows Saks, there is a 10,000 square foot facility in the basement of Saks Fifth Avenue, so 50th Street in Manhattan. And I started managing that as an assistant, as the actual general manager of the location, grew into a regional director role very quickly and managed the entire Northeast for that company. And when that kind of got too hard to just not be home, I had no life, 3 weeks on in travel, and then I'd get a night off, and then I'd be back on the road. And so I took an opportunity and moved to Atlanta. I was offered a job, flown down, and I started my career over. And that was a huge piece for me is relocating, starting fresh, having to get a new network, and went through some different career pivots down here, and then got pregnant with my son. And after having my son, I did not want to go back to work. And I had tons of resume clients. I had tons of coaching clients on the side, and it was a passion of mine. And I knew from all of my executive leadership positions that, I knew how to grow people. I knew how to invest in them. And it was super passionate for me. And so after having my daughter a couple years later, and having all of this side business, it scaled naturally for me. I had tons of referrals, tons of return clients. And that's what kicked off Career Organic for me. I incorporated in 2018 and haven't looked back since.
That is incredible. Thank you for sharing that background. And I think, seeing just, talking with you every week, for anyone that doesn't know, I work with Briar. I'm her customer success manager. It's been fascinating to see not only your growth, but the growth of the company and, have these different types of conversations. So excited for everybody to be able to hear this today. I imagine, as a company that provides resume writing, the interview prep, and the other career related services, it must be pretty interesting to go through the hiring process from the employer point of view. So can you tell us a little bit about how you approach hiring at Career Organic as the hiring manager looking to fill your positions?
Sure, sure. So first, definitely creates a little bit of a power struggle in the interview because a lot of people come in and they feel really insecure that one, we write resumes and we critique them, and so people are afraid of submitting them to us sometimes, just purely out of a fear of whether their resume is good or not. And then interview prep, of course, we coach this. And so I have had candidates who are extremely nervous when they get on the phone with me. But I think the most unique part about our hiring process that I haven't seen a lot in the market is that we actually blind hire, meaning everybody that has been hired in Career Organic has not been seen before we've actually offered them employment. And so what that does for us is it allows candidates to come to the phone call, and it is a phone call, without having to get dressed up, without having to do their hair or their makeup, or not have their cat crawling across their desk in front of them, because I see that a lot, and not have that judged against them. And I want to hear them. I want them to be comfortable. I want them to be in their own zone. And I think I get so much more out of that interview process. And I also can very confidently say that our entire team is just listening. No one's judging what they're seeing or not seeing, or an interruption that you might not hear, but you can see. And so it's really opened up the type of talent that we have. We have a super diverse team, which is really fun because we literally don't see anybody's face until probably a couple weeks through onboarding. And then we'll have a group call and it's like, oh, that's what you look like. Oh, how cool. And so it's a pretty cool culture from that perspective.
Oh, that is so awesome. I'm always camera on over here, but my dog is always in the background, and I think it's a fantastic practice that y'all have over there. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I know that we're talking about what happens when you're interviewing with Career Organic, but in general, a lot of people out there setting up a job search, trying to think, what are the best things I should do? What should I focus on? In your opinion, Briar, and your thoughts per se, what are some really effective ways to set up a great job search?
Yeah. So first you want to think about what keeps people from feeling fatigued or stressed or not wanting to do a job search, right? And so I try and reverse engineer that and figure out what are the steps then to take from the job seeker perspective. And so the first thing that I always like to do is have some metrics. So each week, if you're going to be doing a new job search, how many applications do you actually want to put in? And write that number down. Do you want a 5? Do you want to hit 25? Some people are like 50. Okay, so put the number down. And what that does is it helps you actually first feel like you've hit that number and there's a milestone there. So it limits fatigue because you're achieving something on a daily or weekly basis. But then once you have that number, you want to understand, okay, if I'm going to hit 20 applications, what are the job postings that I'm going to be looking for? And where are those platforms that are going to have those job postings? So for instance, on Career Organic's website, we have an entire page dedicated to live links to different job platforms. And putting that together and curating that, I think creates that fatigue or that paralysis because it's like, oh, this is so much work. Where do I go today to apply? And so if you can pick, say, 5 to 6, you say, okay, I'm going to do LinkedIn, the Mon Project. I'm going to go to Indeed, Monster, ZipRecruiter. Okay, and that's where I'm going to look for jobs. And then throughout the week, if you sat down and you're trying to hit 20 applications, you go, okay, I hit 2 on LinkedIn. Let me move to Indeed. Oh, I have 1 on Indeed. Great. Now let me go to ZipRecruiter. You got the last one. You're able to check the whole day off. The additional piece is tracking everything for yourself. So you want to make sure that when you're applying, you're marking that somewhere. You're using some sort of tool to say, hey, I applied to this. This is the date, so that you can set up that follow-up.
That's fantastic. Briar, I heard you mention a couple different platforms, and
Mhm.
LinkedIn stands out to me because I know we're going through LinkedIn Live right now.
Yeah.
Not a sponsor, not sponsored, not a sponsored message, but we are through LinkedIn Live, and I'm always up on there updating my profile, adding content, etc. How would you, what tips would you give job seekers looking to better leverage LinkedIn and updating their profiles during the search?
Great question. So there's a couple of things with LinkedIn. Number one is it has algorithms that are working behind the scenes to really help you in the job search. So one, the more active you are on the platform, the more it rewards you. So the more it's going to put your profile in front of recruiters or network connections. So that's one. Being active is really important. But before you go getting active and connecting with people and doing all that, you want to update your profile. And so there's some key things that I've seen that really increase your searchability with recruiters. So I'm going to kind of focus on those. So one is your headline. So your headline can get searched. So if you're updating it, for instance, I just had this debate last night. So a couple of my students, and I support job seekers in both student form and graduate form. And so when someone said, can I put UX researcher and UX designer? I mean, it feels a little redundant. Yes, but you can get searched for both of those titles if you have that in your headline. So just think through what are the keywords or what are those key titles that you need in your headline, and take the space. It's got a ton of characters for you up there. 2 is your about section. So that's the first section that you're seeing when you land on someone's profile. So make it fun. Having one blob of a paragraph is really not helping you, because you have to think as a user, a recruiter who's seeing 100 applicants per day at the minimum. They're not reading 100 long, drawn out paragraphs. Bullets, using an emoji. If you want to kind of take an example, my profile has that on the about section. I have some really neat tips, on there. What do I do? Who am I servicing? All of those things that are really important. So having your skill set, having a couple of, these are the things that I drive in my career. Very important. Your experience section, just having some of those things filled out will help. And then your skills section. There are 50 skills you can fill out. So if you are on LinkedIn right now, go to your skills section and see if you are 50 of 50. And if you are not, and you are in a job search, go in there and actually fill out the keywords that are going to help propel you in those searches that recruiters are conducting. And so when you say keywords, it's those terms that you're seeing over and over again in the job postings that are posted online.
Briar, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of questions for you today. Thinking about those skills in that skills section, do you recommend putting those keywords into the experience details as well, or do you find that just listing
100%.
the skills?
So here's the fun part. So there's additional tools, right? And that's a great point. So underneath your experience section, you can actually, once you fill out your skills, so that's your first step, then you're going to go over into each of your experiences, and you can actually add those skills to each of your jobs, and it registers under the role. The more you do this, the more it elevates those skills. And LinkedIn is super cool because sometimes they'll push that to your network to endorse you. I've seen it in my feed. Hey, do you want to endorse this person for these skills? So it's important to do these steps. So literally get 50 skills up and updated, go to your experience section, and then add skills to the experience section. So if you were P&L, you had P&L management for one of those, put the P&L management, project management, put it up there. And then there's one other really cool tool that just came out. So if you're job searching and you really want to work for a company, but they don't have a posting currently, LinkedIn just opened the ability that if a company has a career page and they utilize a recruiter tool, okay, so actually from LinkedIn, their recruiter tool, it's a proprietary product. If they have that access on their about page for their company, so you go to about, You scan down and there is a new section that says, hey, are you interested in working with us? And you can submit your information and put what you're looking for from them. And if a role opens, you are now in their list, which is so cool. It literally just came out, I think this month or last month. So that's a brand new addition to your job search.
It's fantastic. I'll go in there for Career Organic. Everybody signing up there.
Well, we don't. So we use the Mom Project.
We'll get
so
to that.
I don't use the recruiter tool on LinkedIn, so you won't find it on Career Organic. But if you don't, it's a perfect observation though. If you did go to Career Organic's About section, you're not going to see that because we actually use the Mom Project rather than LinkedIn's recruiting tools.
Got it. Good call out. Thank you, Briar. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. We updated our resumes, and we'll get to that. We updated our LinkedIn profiles. We have our 50 out of 50 skills. Now we've interviewed with the company. And I think one of the questions I hear a lot is, when can I follow up? How should I follow up?
Yeah.
So, Briar, my question for you, what advice would you give somebody that really wants to follow up after they apply or after an interview?
Sure. So
knowing where they stand.
Let's start with the application process. So I love this question because there's twofold to this, right? There's being proactive and there's being too aggressive. Okay. And there is a delicate balance. And I just want to say that before I answer. So you do have to discern for yourself, is there a little too much interaction going on? And do you need to just take a breather and allow someone to respond to you before you bombard them? Okay. And so think about, you have an interview, or you submit the application and you're really excited about it. It's on LinkedIn in particular, and you see the hiring manager's name. Now, my tip, and when I teach this, is that you actually go to someone else in the company, try and connect with them, and then ask them, hey, who would be a really good person to reach out to, rather than assuming that it's the hiring manager, especially if the hiring manager is higher up in the organization. You have to realize that they're fielding a lot of requests. They're interviewing right now, so their calendar's probably pretty packed. And if you actually want that message to get through, doing a little bit of homework and finding who that person is first would be great. Then it's going to their profile. If they have an open profile where you can connect with them without knowing their email address, then you go into the connection request with an invite message. So you want to tailor that. So when I get a lot of connection requests, I'm pretty, I like to connect with a lot of people. And so you don't have to have a personalized message for me to click on your thing. Some people want to understand, what's the ask? What are you actually trying to get? And so that would be a great opportunity to put in the invite, personalize it, and say, I'm very excited about, the role that I just saw posted with this company's mission and the role being focused on this, right? And you got to pull these things from what you want to showcase, and then put my skill set and my background in, PR really helps support my ability to drive success in this role. Would love to connect, right? And so you're tying the loop together. You're giving context, but you're not being pushy. You're showing interest. So that's after an application. Then after an interview, there's several ways you can do this because, are you interviewing virtually? Are you interviewing in person? One of my tips of not to do, because I've been a hiring manager for over 20 years, I've seen it all, is to pre-write your follow-up note if it's a handwritten note. Because I've literally been done with an interview and 5 minutes later, someone handed me the note, and the note was exactly the same as my colleague who had interviewed her earlier. And I was like, oh, okay. So it just didn't feel thoughtful because it was so quick a turnaround. And so you want to take just a little pause, put your thoughts together. If it's going to be an email because it's virtual, you want to just make sure that you're again, tying the loop together. So what from that interview stood out? What did you learn more about the role? What excited you more about that interview or the culture or even the connection you had with the interviewer, and personalize that message before it goes out.
I love that advice. And I think that personalization, as I struggle to say the word, it makes a huge difference. I
It
mean, in
does.
any conversation, imagine if I came to you, Briar, and said, hello, Briar, blah, 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 blah. No, it makes a huge difference and, shows that interest. Now, you've given a lot of advice and we have more advice to come, Briar. With all these different things that you're keeping in mind as you're going through the job search process, what are some things that you've noticed that are common misses that can easily be avoided or looked out for?
Yeah. So I think like when you're going through the application process, some of the biggest misses that I see that I do a lot of coaching on is not bridging the gap when you're making a transition. And what do I mean by that? So you think you're coming from, say, a non-technology role. Okay. So maybe you were a retail store manager somewhere, and now you're transitioning into tech. You can't have a number one, you can't have a resume that speaks from a retail manager perspective. It has to translate those skill sets and the language, right? The jargon into the new industry. And so if I'm reading a resume and it's supposed to be tech focused, then even your past experiences should include some of those keywords. And you think about, so like if someone was a retail store manager, for instance, they had inventory management, project management, they had to manage timelines, customer success or customer experience. They had to manage, the cadence of scheduling and workflows. Well, you need to talk like that over in the tech world, right? So managing and prioritizing workflows, gathering requirements from customers. So you're going to say that in your previous experiences, even though they weren't from the industry that you're applying. It's a huge, huge miss. It is not translating for that. And I will say, additionally, there's a tip that, I don't know if anybody here uses Chat GPT, but if you need those keywords, right? And so we were talking about, resumes and misses. The applicant tracking system, so if anybody's heard of ATS, stands for applicant tracking system, software that is scanning that resume and sorting you or giving you an auto rejection. It's looking for keywords. Keywords are those pieces of jargon from the industry or the role that you need to hit. Chat GPT, if you use it, you can actually type that as a question. Major keywords for software engineering roles in the healthcare industry. And it will filter an entire keyword list for you. So if you're not, wanting to pay for JobScan or anything else, it's a super cool new tool that can be utilized to pull those keywords in and make sure you're translating that correctly.
Wow. I was going to say, AI have not used ChatGPT yet. That was my AI joke for the day. But I'm curious, Briar, you mentioned, listing these transferable skills, especially switching industries. And
Mm-hmm.
those are questions, I hear a lot. I'm looking to break into tech. I'm looking to break into this
Yeah.
new industry. How do I tell that story? And, we give similar advice. So I give similar advice just personally, not a professional. But I'm curious, cover letters. I think that's a great way to tell a story personally. But you hear a lot of controversy about cover letters. Now, is that something you recommend? You enjoy reading
Oh,
as a hiring manager?
absolutely.
What are your thoughts?
100%. So I'm big in metrics, right? And so you want to counterbalance. Is this going to be an asset for the application? And number one, cover letters get scanned by that ATS system that we were just talking about. So if that can elevate just from a metrics perspective, your application, I'm already in. Two is that you can then personalize it. All those passion points, all of those things, maybe from your background that is hard to illustrate on your resume, you can talk about those. I had someone who was going into a role and it was in like forestry. And she was like an avid camper. She did all these like volunteer things in the woods. And it's like, it's not work experience that would be illustrated in full on her resume. And so she took the time to write that into her cover letter. And we did like this passion piece cover letter. And She was underqualified for the role. The company still reached out to her and said they were so impressed with her background and message to them that they were going to keep her application on file for something that was more appropriately fit and aligned to her. That to me is a win.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love to hear stories like that. And, keeping on the same lines, we talked about career pivots. I think one thing that we see a lot, especially at the Mom Project, is, parents returning to the workforce. So keeping in theme with, potential things to look out for, common misses, what are some things that parents returning to the workforce should consider when they're going through their job search?
I would say there's two things. So one is going to be on their resume, actually putting that they had a career pause. A lot of people don't want to put that because they feel vulnerable. And I understand. I'm a mom. I get it. But you have to think from an employer perspective. If they see, say, a year or 2-year gap or whatever on your resume, they're going to have to ask you about that. And then you're in an uncomfortable position having to talk about your family and your choices and your decision making. And that's personal. So putting career pause on the resume allows them to see that and move on. And if that's a big no for them, I would say as a parent, you don't really want to be working for that culture anyway. So that's one, is just account for the time that you were out and let it move on. Then 2 is confidence. So returning parents tend to, when I coach them in particular, they tend to apologize for everything. And it's this feeling of inferiority coming back and having been out of the workforce. So that's like a very strong feeling. And I went through this myself when I had my son. And, I took my 3 months and was like, this is amazing, before I started taking client projects again. And I loved that balance. But I was like, I have to get my brain back, and I have to, and this is something that internally, I'm not saying anybody else is having this conversation inside. Maybe people resonate, but I wanted to, take it slow because I had been out of the workforce. Meanwhile, I was managing a health and fitness club in New York City when I was 20 years old. And so all that skill set, it didn't go away just because I had a baby. It's still there. It's like picking up the bike and I'm able to ride it again. And a lot of parents forget that. That skill set, that cumulative experience that you've collected over the years is huge. It's an asset, but you have to own that it's an asset, show up to the interview with that level of confidence. Because not only have you conquered your previous career, you're also coming back. You're going to be managing 2 jobs because you're also a mom or a dad, and you're going to be working. And that's a huge resilience. So owning that and coming to the table, both from your branding perspective, your networking strategy, and the interview process, hands down is one of the biggest misses I see.
Well, thank you for that. That confidence piece resonates, not just for parents, but anybody looking for a job, having confidence in themselves, putting themselves out there, knowing, what they're bringing to the table. That shines through, I think, so much with employers. And
it absolutely does. Absolutely.
Now, as it relates to the Mom Project platform, what have you seen in a profile that really makes a candidate stand out? And if you could tell candidates how to better approach their applications to stand out on that platform, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that cover letters, because we just spoke about this, cover letters are the top thing I look at when I'm recruiting. And I will say, I recruited one role last year and it had 1,300 plus applicants for it.
Wow.
I went through every single one of them. Okay. So one thing about Career Organic, we do go through all of our applicants. We take it very seriously that maybe your resume is not great, but we want to dive into that candidate. And when I see a lack of focus or grammar or understanding of the role in that cover letter, then that's a miss for me. It means, and sometimes I often see a cover letter or like a little intro statement say something that's not even related to the role. And so what that means to me is that candidates have a scripted response that they're pasting in, which is fine, but you have to take at least 2 to 3 minutes out of your time, find something in that job posting that sticks out to you and relate it. to your employer or future employer or potential employer. So we feel like you've taken the time as a candidate to apply with intention. So that's one. Two is then there are some really cool places where you could put like your superpowers and your skill set and your skill level. Take time in filling that out, because I've seen a lot of mismatches where I'm having someone apply to a role, but their skill set is focused on something completely different. And if I'm just scanning and I'm not looking at their resume and I'm not diving deeper in, that's going to be a miss.
That's a really good point. Think about the amount of time recruiters are going through and reviewing resumes and how quickly they have to look at them, and doing as much of that, tying things together for them, makes a huge difference and a huge impact. So I love that, Briar. Now, before we switch over to the Q&A, I see we're about halfway through the time, and we absolutely want to get some Q&A. So if you're out there somewhere in the world, throw some questions at us. We'll get through all of them. But before we switch over to Q&A, I have two last questions for you. So question number 1 of 2. What advice would you give for all the working parents who joined us today as they work toward achieving their career goals?
Yeah. So one, I would say have patience. Being a parent puts a little bit more stress on a job search. You have an interview and it's at an inconvenient time, or your kid's going to be getting off the bus, and now you've got to like maneuver. Have patience, and celebrate your wins first. And what I mean by celebrating your win is, if you get a request for an interview, bravo. Like, don't wait for after the interview to celebrate yourself. Like, every single incremental moment that is better than the moment before should be celebrated. And that becomes a habit for you in your job search and your career. And then 2 would be, realize that there are companies that love the culture of supporting parents, and there are companies that aren't. And you don't have to pick the company that's not going to support you, but expand your search and then interview against that culture. And that's something that I think a lot of people forget, is they hone in their search so tight because they're looking at Glassdoor, they're looking at these Google reviews on company culture and like what it provides. And sometimes you're interviewing with a team that doesn't support that culture, right? Because it's always the boss or the supervisor who's over that department or team that runs the culture of that team. And so I'm a big fan of opening up a job search, casting a little bit of a wider net, and then getting yourself into an interview where you can be strategic about the questions you ask to understand if it's going to be a fit for you and your family.
That's great. Briar, I completely agree. I see comment, we love companies that support parents. We absolutely do here. So thank you for that comment as well. Now, my last question for you before we flip it over to the Q&A, just having worked together, talking about life as people do when you talk. I know you're a mom of 2 over there. What advice would you give, or I guess backtrack, would you just mind in general sharing thoughts about what you have to keep in mind every day as a working parent?
Yeah, a whole lot, actually. Well, I think the biggest piece for me, I think that, I manage a lot of different moving pieces in my life. And so why don't I start there is, I'm a homeschool parent. I have 2 kids who are 7 and 9. I am a Den Scout leader for Cub Scouts. I am on a board and, an advisory board where I actually put in a lot of work. I work with a company called General Assembly to provide coaching for student cohorts. And I run Career Organic and have my own private clientele through Career Organic and support my teams. And I do the hiring process and all of that fun stuff. And so my days are pretty tight on time investment. And so I would say as a working parent, I need to have very hardcore boundaries. And I even coach my own team. So I have a lot of parents on my team because naturally I recruit through the Mom Project. So I tend to find a lot of parents that want to work with us. And so it's defining those boundaries, number 1, and then keeping and applying them. And when I think about boundaries, it's understanding what non-negotiables you have and not letting someone let you cross it. Meaning, if you can't do a night call, you got to be able to say no, because the one time you say yes, that has created a new expectation for you. And as a parent, we don't have that time. We can't get that back. And once we cross that boundary, it is so difficult to rein it in. And it's got such an awful domino effect. And it really does hurt. It hurts your person, not just your professional career, because everybody else is kind of counting on that time from you. So really being strict on boundaries helps me be able to do all the really fun things that I want to do, support my team, support my family, be there for the people that are in my life, and my extended network.
That's a great answer, Briar. Thank you. I have a million questions to ask, but this is not my time, so we're going to get to the Q&A. So I'll shout out. Of course, I know you mentioned your team. I saw a couple members in the chat shouting them out now. And of course, on the Mom Project end, Jane and Elizabeth, who are crushing it on the back end, are going to start putting some questions up on screen for us to read. So this first question, Maria, thank you for sharing this. Maria asks, I agree that cover letters are critical. However, I'm finding that I'm spending so much time on customizing it, but often worried about the length, wordiness, etc. Briar, what do you recommend as an eye catcher?
That is a great question. So we utilize a template internally with Career Organic, and the format, and I'll just kind of walk through the format. So in the top, you want to have that, hey, I saw this job posting and this piece of the job posting really stood out to me. Okay. And so this is a really quick fix per application, right? So it does require you to take a moment, look at the job posting and say, oh, I really loved the fact that, it's having a seat at the table and driving project management. Okay, great. So you take that snippet literally out of the job posting and put it in their words. And then you kind of answer in a paragraph saying, here's why, right? So I love this job posting and I knew I was a perfect fit when I saw this snippet. Here's why. And then you actually get to explain your skill set. The thing is that you're going to notice when you're applying to roles that are similar, sister, cousin roles, right? So they have some similarities. You're going to be able to just flip a script on managing what words you're using, managing the positioning strategy within it. So it shouldn't change a ton. So that top paragraph is here's why. So my background in X, Y, and Z has really propelled me to be, an integral team leader within whatever. Okay. So you've got your little passion piece paragraph. And then the second part of, and this is maybe the top third. Okay. So we're thinking one page. Okay. Top third of your cover letter is already done. You're going to put a little one line about please see some, highlights that are, that match your job description qualifications, something along this. And then you put 2 to 3 so the keywords. So if they need project management. And then you can talk about your experience in a couple either bullets or a little paragraph. And what I would say to you, Maria, is if you're going for roles that have additional, so say it's 5 different things that these roles could have, write those 5 bullets out. So project management, retail experience, leadership experience, time management, budget management. Write your little snippets, save it off on a master document. And then every role, all you're editing is that top piece. You're taking from the job description, you're putting it into your cover letter, you're going down to the key highlights, you're taking out the project management, you're putting in the retail management piece, and you're good to go. You're muted.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Sorry, it's my sore throat over here. I didn't want anyone to hear me coughing away.
I was I can't, no, I know I'm old, but I can't hear you, Nick.
Nick's quieter than usual. All right, well, I am back in action. Next question, Victoria, thank you for sharing this question. Briar, work from home is a lot of extra work sometimes. It's really hard to separate home and work life. Do you have any tips?
Yes. So I work at home. I also homeschool, right? So like, and my husband works at home full time. So dedicated workspaces are really, really important. And it depends. So if you have children at home, or you have, even a dog at home, because I know there's animals that require certain attention. What you would want to do is first dedicate certain spaces for you. Where do you keep things? Keep it organized. I see that eliminates a lot of my stress, that it's when I'm working and I'm in this space, it is a no-fly zone. Okay. This is where I'm going to be working. I notice that if I take my laptop, say after work, and like it's Friday today, so I might want to check emails after work, and the kids typically, they'll do like movie night. And so I'm like, yeah, I can take advantage of that right now. I notice that I can overinvest time. I'm not thinking as clearly because it is not a dedicated workspace for me. The other thing is, what a lot of people miss is communication with the other people that are in their home. What's the expectation? So like my husband and I have very clear expectations. Like if our door is open and we're working in our offices or our spaces, that means people can come and go and ask questions, and we can be interrupted. If the door is closed, the expectation, and we've verbally said these expectations, which is the important piece here. It's not like in our head and we're just trying to, through telepathy, get it over to the other person. We are saying, this is my expectation. When my door is closed, you do not knock. You do not, yell in, any of those really fun things. And then we also have if there is an emergency, this is how we contact each other, or this would be the way that we contact each other, or alert each other. So I think it's just really important to say, hey, this is my working hours. This is when I'm doing this. This is when I can't be interrupted. This is when it means I can't be interrupted. And then for anything outside of that, that's a complete anomaly for the day, this is how we're going to work through it.
I love those themes of, communication, of course, and then setting and maintaining expectations. Like, that's great. Shannon, question from Shannon. Shannon, thank you for asking this question. I'm struggling with time spent with staffing agencies, emailing, calling, texting, LinkedIn messages, and actually checking the job boards. So any advice?
So I think and if this is in reference to the job search, right? I would say that, when you're setting up the job search and you're saying, hey, this is the number of applications I want to put in, these are the companies or the platforms that I'm going to be using, that you also dedicate calendar time to that. And this is a big piece so I work with my students on this in particular, because they're coming out of a course or a class. So that's an investment in and of itself. Then they've got to, ramp up for this job search. And what I see people work on really well is setting. So like in the morning, if you're very productive in the morning, I would say, hey, I'm going to look at new applications in the morning. So like 9 to 10, it's application time. When it's 11 to 12, so I take a break, maybe I take a walk, maybe I take the animal out, whatever it is. Then 11 to 12, I'm going to be fielding answers to anything that's been incoming. And I think that, the emailing, the texting, the LinkedIn, being able to say, hey, it's not time for that yet, is really empowering. When you feel like you're constantly on the clock to answer people all day, every day, that's when fatigue happens. It really does, because you hit the threshold, you're in annoyance mode, and then all of your energy gets sucked out of you. And so everything after that becomes 10 times harder because it wasn't pre-managed. And so give yourself the space to say, hey, not right now. I don't have that allotted. I will say it's much easier to do that and say no when you have it on your calendar.
Thank you, Briar. And thank you, Shannon, for the question. Right, next question we'll see. Julie, thank you. So Julie asks us, Briar, what are some resilience tips for today's economy? With layoffs happening every day and more people to compete with, how can you stay strong, especially as a student with not much experience?
Absolutely. That is such a great question. So again, with the amount of layoffs that are coming and kind of financial ambiguity, right, with organizations, one, I would say, you always do have to look at the market. And so in the tech space in particular, my notice here was a lot of the organizations that were laying off were trying to drive innovation in a market where consumers are living through inflation, right? So what do you do when you don't have as much money to spend on the things that consumers typically want to spend on? They cut them. And so if you're looking in a job search, especially if you're competing against a lot of people, you should be looking at the industries that are going to sustain through this, so that you're not just fearful about getting the job and now you're fearful of losing it, right? And so if you're looking at high innovation tech organizations, if they're fully funded and that's like for the next 2 years, have fun, go for it. If they're still trying to acquire funding in a market like this, I would be looking for something that's fully funded, a larger organization possibly, but also if they're pushing a tool or a product that's a necessity for organizations or people, you're going to have better chance kind of getting in there and not being so scared of the market. And then I would say, as a student without a lot of experience, this is where cover letters and bridging the gap between experiences really comes in. And so if you're going to pull your background, right? Most students that come to me, they're like, I don't have any experience. And I'm like, when I graduated high school, I had babysat. I was a DARE role model. I was co-captain of my basketball team. I was all over the place. However, take that 1 to 2 things that you've done and capitalize on that, because all experience is experience, whether you were paid for it or not. It all has value. It all has cumulative value as well, because it adds on to what you're learning. So if you are a student without a lot of experience, you have to have a resume that illustrates as much as you possibly can. Do you volunteer? Do you babysit? Do you what are this? Maybe you're developing an app just for fun. Put it on your resume. Show that you are involved and you want to grow your career.
It was great. I remember listing my first experiences as a lawnmower. I was mowing lawns as a 15-year-old, and I put that on there, and I always reference what I learned. So
that's right.
Thank you for that question. We have another question here from Liz Hansen. Liz, thank you. So Briar, speaking of companies keeping your application on file for another role, how often does this actually result in a call back from the company? And what's an appropriate amount of follow-up from the candidate?
Great question. So one, resulting in a callback is really how organized that organization is and how much of an impact you made on the hiring manager or that hiring person that's keeping your application on file. This does happen. I just had a student where this happened, and they told him he wasn't really qualified for the role. And a month later, they just reached out to him saying, hey, we're reopening that role. They ended up closing the role. They didn't hire anybody. And so a month later, they reached out to him and asked, would you be interested in coming back into the interview process? So he told me that Tuesday. So like literally this week, I have proof and evidence that like it does happen. What's the time frame for following back up? So there's two different things with the follow-up, right? So one, if you submit an application, you have an interview, you want to send that follow-up like thank you note immediately. Now they ghost you, right? Because this is happening in the market. It does happen. I always put in a calendar date of about 5 days, and I watch the day. So, and we actually have my team is gonna put together a recap of this event. And we actually have a little guide on how to follow up and kind of the things to think about. So, and the things to avoid. So like, don't ever send a follow-up email, not a thank you email. That can go out anytime. Follow-up emails do not go out on Mondays. It's just a super busy day. It is going to get lost in translation, okay? So there are specific times of day and dates that you can put in. So just keep that in mind. Don't be sending it over the weekend because it is going to get lost by Monday. So, Tuesday through Friday is much better. But you want to make sure that, say, like 5 days. And what I like to do is when you're going in and you're having these conversations, and that's either for an interview or even say a mentorship or an informational interview, you can do the 5-day. If you get ghosted, then I put it for 3 weeks from that. So like that month. Okay. And what I do is you say, all right, this is the person I spoke to. This is when I want to follow up. Go to your calendar. So do you use Google Calendar, Outlook, whatever you use? Okay. And you actually put a note. So like put an event on your calendar, 12 o'clock on April 15th. I am going to follow up with Nick Cott, and I spoke with him about, and put your little note. So, he was telling me about customer success management at the Mom Project. Okay, great. And then you pre-write the note you want to send. So like the day you have that conversation, you're going to pre-write the note and say like, Nick, it was so great to, talk to you today. Thank you so much for sharing that information. I'm so interested in, joining the Mom Project. I can't wait to reconnect. Okay, great. Okay. You put it in the notes of the invite. And so when we were talking about fatigue earlier, and with all these messages coming along, like I get that applicants are going through major fatigue, major job search fatigue. And it's because you feel like you have to respond immediately, because I have to send that note. And now you have to react. And that's like really taxing. So if you put that in a calendar note, then you're able to, it pings you that day, like 12 o'clock. Hey, time to send that note to Nick. You have his email address, the context of the conversation, who he was, and you have a pre-written note ready to go. It's 2 minutes, you're done.
That's amazing. Nothing worse than following up later and thinking, what did I have to say? I love that tip, Briar. It's fantastic. Right now, here's another question. Speaking of boundaries, I love this question. When's a good time to let the recruiters know about your boundaries and working or not working at nights or over the weekend and so forth?
So great question. There's a couple different takes on this. So specific, like hard limits, meaning shifts, you want to be upfront. So if they're looking at, so like this happens a lot in hospitality, right? So you're interviewing at a hotel and so like, yeah, we're looking for front desk associate, and the recruiter tells you it's the night shift, and you're like, not me. Don't go through the interview process. Let them know up front, because what you'll do if you go through it is burn the bridge at the end when they're like, hey, we really like you, but you weren't truthful up front. So that's kind of the take that can happen. But when it's, I'm not going to work past 5, or I'm not going to work past 6, or whatever that might be, that is when you get to that interview round where it's like almost final round, and you're talking with the team and you're starting to get to understand the culture there. Now you've been fully considered. Now it's time to start talking about those details before a job offer is given. But it is not upfront, and it's not typically with the recruiter. It would be with the people that you're going to be working with that you're starting to question. And so what's really fun is that if you can create good questions in the interview process, you're expressing your boundaries, but through questions. So it's implicit communication, and you're getting them to tell you whether or not they're actually going to abide by that boundary. So.
Well, thank you, Briar, and thank you everybody for the questions today. I talk all the time, and I was excited to hear everybody hear Briar's advice as well, and it was fantastic. So this officially concludes today's session. I want to big thank you to our guest speaker, Briar Dougherty, for joining us and sharing her story and insights about Career Organic. So we hope that everybody leaves today having learned something new that can apply to their career journey today and beyond. Now, as a reminder, there's going to be a recording of this session made available to all attendees. Obviously, thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the next one. And my last piece here, Briar, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that want to connect with you, want to reach out. What's the best way to reach out to you, connect to you, just stay in touch with you, moving on?
Yeah, well, considering that we're talking about people that might be making a job transition, I'd love to keep everyone on LinkedIn. It's a great platform and should be using it. And so feel free to connect in a DM to me in my inbox. We also have a chat on our website. So if you had additional questions or anything that you wanted to ask specifically to your career journey or what next steps should look like for you, careerorganic.com. We actually have the ability to chat through that as well, and lots of resources and freebies and things on that site as well.
Wow. Thank you, Briar.
And I'm the only one with my name on LinkedIn.
Love
so
that.
you can actually type my name in and I'm the only one that pops up. So
I know. I have one more question for you. I just reached out to the team and said, hey, I've got one question for Briar. So we've been talking about interviewing today. We've been talking about getting pumped up. And before this, we were talking about, a little at-bat music. What music do you listen to get pumped up? Briar, you shared your answer. So if you're comfortable sharing that answer,
of course,
I would love for you to share some of that, what we were talking about, and then share what music you listen to as your pump up.
Sure. So it was in reference, we were talking about music, but I was sharing that when I work with student groups and the cohorts that I support in the interview process, a lot of them are really nervous. A lot of people are introverts. I'm actually introverted. I know no one would believe it. I know. When I talk about the things that I love, like I love talking about careers and I love career journeys and like understanding people's stories. And so it lights me up naturally. But outside of that, I'm very reserved. And so, especially for introverts who, they get paralyzed before the interview and they shut down emotionally and physically, and they feel like they're going to stumble through it. To get yourself out of that mindset and really get you to the level you need to be at, right? So it's like you need to be, when you're ready to interview, you need to be like ready. And so I suggest playing music up until about 5 minutes before your call. And the music that I want people playing is the music that like gets them moving, gets them up, gets their spirit up. And so I shared with Nick and the Mom Project team that music for me is Pitbull. And that's also my workout music. That's my because I feel it. It like moves my body. And so anything that can do that for you is important. And music throughout the entire job search strategy is important. So when you're sitting and you're applying and you're getting bored, it's like a pick-me-up is fantastic. And it's a great, easy asset to just pull in and leverage for your search and anything really in life. But yes, Pitbull is my stomping ground there, and I do some like hardcore workouts to it, and
Wow.
it gets me pumped.
Briar, well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing Mr. 305 as well. And again, big thank you to everybody here. Briar, it has been a blast, as I knew it would. So please connect with Briar, get the recording here, watch the recording, and I hope everybody has a great, relaxing weekend to look forward to. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Absolutely. Talk